Hello everyone, I'm Brandon Adams, and these are the moments we live for. Hopefully you're enjoying your early signing day. Certainly for Georgia fans, it could be about to get a whole lot better. This is a Kroger Commitment Special where Georgia fans hope to see a commitment and then a signature from five-star defensive lineman Jordan Burch. We're here to cover all of that for you. We'll go live to Columbia, South Carolina and the Hammond School, where Burch is about to literally take center stage on a platform with microphones all around. You see him getting seated and being gathered around there. We see Christmas gifts on the table, so presumably part of his show in revealing his choice will involve these gifts. We'll obviously be able to show this to you live as it happens. You get a chance to hear this for yourself as one of the nation's top prospects will choose between Georgia. His finalists have also included Alabama and LSU, Clemson and South Carolina. So the Dogs solidly in the mix of this, and for Georgia, what has already been a successful early signing day and really a part of what hopes to be and expects to be a successful 2020 class, a big symbol of Georgia's continued recruiting prowess would be able to win with a guy like Burch here today. And the interesting aspect of Burch's recruitment is really multifaceted. On the one hand, if Burch were to choose Georgia, it's a continuation of what has been as of late a pretty nice run for Georgia with defensive line commits. Whether you're going to go back to last year, where Georgia went to the state of Tennessee to pull out 3 defensive linemen, also bring in Trayvon Walker. Walker ended up being one of the top freshman players of any position in the SEC, and certainly a big-time defensive lineman in the future, capping off that already for the 2020 class. Guys like Warren Brinson and Jalen Carter. This has become a position group in which Georgia is recruiting pretty well as of late, and also quite formidable on the field with the defensive line here this season. But the next big name to potentially add to that would be the 5-star Jordan Burch. When that announcement takes place, inside of 10 minutes, we'll be able to bring that to you live right here on these Dog Nation video channels. Of course, I don't have to tell you the specific challenge involved when it comes to Burch's recruitment, whether it be the late push from a school like LSU, seemingly gotten a lot of momentum, winning with Phillip Webb here today, originally winning with the 5-star tight end Rick Gilbert, other big names the Tigers have been able to add to their class to go along with an SEC championship and a trip to the college football playoff. Obviously, a guy like Burch notices all that. It's presumably one of the reasons he's given LSU some attention. There's also the in-state pull of a program like Clemson in the upstate above where Columbia is, but a program that has done exceedingly well when it comes to defensive linemen, recruiting them and then putting them in the NFL. Obviously, that's something that Burch has likely noticed. Maybe most significant of all, though, if you're a Georgia fan thinking about trying to win this recruiting battle, is the fact that Burch, where his body rests right now in Columbia, South Carolina, is also the home of another SEC program, the South Carolina Gamecocks. And to complicate matters even more, Burch plays on the high school team, the Skyhawks of Hammond, along with Will Muschamp's son. It's been suggested that Muschamp and Burch are pretty good friends. I mean, the younger Muschamp and Burch are good friends. Obviously, the dad of a player. It's presumed that the relationship is probably pretty strong there with South Carolina coach Will Muschamp. So if Georgia goes into enemy territory and wins with Burch today, it will have no doubt pulled off a significant recruiting feat. Now, this is something that Georgia's done a couple times already in the Kirby Smart tenure, including in this town of Columbia, South Carolina, as part of the class of 2018, winning with linebacker Channing Tindall. You'll think about Georgia going into Knoxville to pull out offensive lineman Cade Mays. That was a complicated situation, given the fact that Mays' dad had been a prominent Tennessee booster, also a former Vols player himself. So Georgia has chosen to swim in deep, challenging recruiting waters before, and Jordan Burch might represent as difficult a recruiting challenge as Kirby Smart has taken on since he's been the head coach of UGA. And in just about 5 minutes, we will find out what Burch is going to do. We will go there live when he's ready to speak. In fact, I'll get the thumbs up from my guys on the other side of the glass, and we'll be able to send that to you, give you a chance to hear everything that he's saying. Jeff Sintel is with us here today in Atlanta. He's covering the Jordan Burch news and everything else that goes on. And when Burch makes his announcement one way or another, whether it be good news for UGA fans or not, Jeff will be able to hop on here and give us the insight that he's learned about this as he's been working the phones and every other means of technology over the course of the last 48, 72 hours with all of his sources trying to lay out the more likely scenario for Georgia and how it finishes off this day one of the early signing period, and Jordan Burch is a big step in that direction. While we're waiting on Burch, and we're still a couple of minutes away on that, let's pop over here. We'll get some of your Facebook and some of your YouTube comments. We'll try to hit up the Twitter audience there as well, give you a chance to react before Jordan Burch makes his announcement coming up in just about 5 minutes' time. I'll also remind you that our recruiting special here is presented by our friends at Kroger, and a great opportunity for you to save this time of year. 12 Mary is the phrase to remember here. Simply text the word 12 Mary. That's 12 MERRY. Text 12 Mary. Can we show folks the number to text 12 Mary to? 12 Mary 12 Mary like Merry Christmas to 99894, and you can start saving today. Text 12 Mary 99894. Opt in to start saving today during 12 days of Mary at Kroger. You see some officials there associated with the Hammond School. Do we need to hear what they're saying here, or are we going to let's take a listen in and find out what's going on here in Columbia, South Carolina for a moment. Let's hear ahead of Jordan Burch's announcement.
Media outlets that, you blow up all the time. But the way I got to see Jordan Burch as a person, as a student, as a scholar, as a great kid, mom has raised him very well, a leader among his peers, a hard worker, a kid who laughs, a kid who smiles, a kid who has a good time with his friends, a kid. And moving forward, Jordan will become a man with hard work, but keep those base values that you have brought to Hammond. And as a person, your athleticism speaks for itself. The person I've got to know is the person I love. And so, Jordan, I'm extremely proud of you, and I'm extremely confident that you'll make the right decision for you. And whatever decision you make, just like Mr. Angel said, will be the right decision. So, Jordan, good luck. We're super proud of you, and we love you, man.
All right, when I'm done here, there'll be a little bit of a pause, and we're going to play a video that should stream live on ESPN, is that correct? And then Jordan will respond when he's talked to by ESPN. But Jordan, we've talked a lot over the years, and it's been a blessing to coach you. And I just want to leave you with three things. I echo everything that Coach Barnes said, which is, at the end of the day, so many people see college athletes, potential athletes, as commodities. All we have here is a wonderful human being. And he's displayed that by his time here at Hammond. You got a lot of people looking at you now, though. And I remember sending you a picture of my son Kyle looking at you, and the first thing I leave with is remember everything matters, and everybody's looking up to you now. And I know that you'll wear that Burch name across your back well, and whatever school you choose across the front of your chest well. Number two, be yourself. Be yourself. People are going to try to compare you to other people. Be who you are, because who you are is a beautiful person. So aim true. And last, it's going to be hard. So when you get there, do your best, give it your all. And if you apply your God-given ability to this game of football, the sky's the limit. I'm proud of you. I love you. Can't wait to see what you're going to do. No way to see it.
All right, so a little bit of a video presentation inside the auditorium there at the Hammond School. We're not privy to what they're watching there, but there were some dignitaries and some key officials saying some well wishes here to Jordan Burch. You're watching live coverage of what's about to be Burch's commitment decision, choosing between two in-state schools, South Carolina and Clemson, three out-of-state schools, LSU and Alabama out of the SEC West, and of course the Georgia Bulldogs, which is presumably the reason why most of you are here. We are now inside of a couple of minutes away from Burch's expected announcement. One of the things that you see on the desk or on the table in front of Burch, not the typical hat show where various hats are there, but a number of presents. Presumably those presents will become props for the announcement that Burch is about to make. Of course, all of our coverage is brought to you by our friends at Kroger, and you will find out exactly when we do what Burch's decision is going to be, and when they're ready to start talking about that again, we'll be able to hear a whole lot more about that. Eric Gillespie checking in to say, go Dogs. Appreciate you being here for that. A lot of folks talking about a lot of things have already kind of gone on today, so we're obviously paying a lot of attention to all of that. A lot of folks excited to find out what five-star defensive lineman Jordan Burch is going to do, watching on Facebook, on YouTube, and Twitter. Cliff Payne also reminds us that we'll be able to provide you coverage as well when Jermaine Burton, the top-flight wide receiver, makes a decision a little bit later on. Burch and Burton, two of the big names that are still out there for Georgia. And obviously, names we're all following here pretty closely, but the man of the hour for right now, and you can certainly tell this just giving all the microphones around, the man of the hour right now is Jordan Burch, and he's going to be making his decision here coming up in just a moment. And we'll be able to, as soon as he's ready to start talking and making his announcement, we'll be able to send that out there to you. And, of course, bring that great job by Michael Carvel and our team on hand in Columbia, South Carolina, to make all this possible. K9 Blues feeling pretty good as well about Jermaine Burton a little bit later on. We'll see how that goes. Valance also feeling pretty good about the fact that a little earlier Georgia win with Arian Smith. Let's check in on Jordan Burch right now, though.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I will be taking my academic and my athletic talents to the University of South Carolina.
All right, so there you have it. Jordan Burch has chosen the in-state school, the South Carolina Gamecocks. So the pull of the hometown here, and obviously you see that quite popular with the folks there in the room there in the Hammond School in Columbia. No doubt this is an important recruiting win for Will Muschamp, just given the uncertain status of his future. Obviously, Gamecocks beat Georgia on the field this season, but only 4-8 on the year, and Muschamp's one of those guys that starts the upcoming season as squarely on the hot seat as any coach possibly could be, and obviously the Jordan Burch recruitment, just given the fact he was a hometown guy, becomes a very big part of the story of how that program rebuilds itself and rebrands itself for a better run in 2020. Hiring Mike Bobo as offensive coordinator is obviously a part of that too, but it is good news today to be a Gamecock fan when it comes to Jordan Burch. Georgia missing out on a 5-star defensive lineman here, a defensive lineman that Georgia got a chance to host on his final visit this past weekend before the end of the open period. Georgia had Burch on campus a number of times. That when it comes to being able to make a pitch in person, face-to-face, Georgia had that opportunity about as much as anybody possibly could have. But in this particular case, it's not going to work out Georgia's way here as Burch chooses the South Carolina Gamecocks. A lot of moving parts here on this. I think there'll be a lot of intrigue about how this may have changed and evolved over the course of the last 24 to 48 hours. If this was expected to be South Carolina all along with the people closest to Burch, remember, Burch is not one to speak publicly a lot. So we haven't really ever gotten a whole lot of insight into his thought process on this. So we don't really know as of now. Now, Burch will speak on ESPN, and then hopefully we'll get a chance to speak to him as well. We'll get some more insight from him, at least we hope to. But certainly his thought process on all this has been a bit of a mystery. And when you think about lots of changes in terms of the way in which this announcement was going to go down, initially slated to be on Thursday, at one point in time not taking place in Columbia, going to be outside the city in another location. How much of the various changes may have also altered the thinking about where Burch ultimately wanted to play? How much deliberation was there to the final whistle on all of this? Those are things that Jordan Burch will have to tell us himself. Obviously, I'll take a couple minutes to get some of your comments here. We hope to hear from Jeff Sintel on this too, on what is admittedly a little bit of a loss here for Georgia, not getting the defensive lineman that hoped to get with 5-star Jordan Burch. Maurice Long not feeling too good about it, comparing this to what happened on the field against the Gamecocks a little earlier this year. Jacob O'Neal, though, being classy. Good luck to the kid, and yeah, we got no beef with him whatsoever. He made the decision he thought was best for him. We'll wish him well, and obviously Georgia will turn its attention to other big announcements slated to come here over the course of the next couple of weeks. Rick Mason says Burch was South Carolina all the time, and Rick, you may be right about that. That may be indeed what the story behind the story always was. Certainly there were plenty of reasons to think that might not quite be so true, and certainly plenty of circumstantial evidence to suggest that maybe something else was at play. But obviously, when it was all said and done, on the moment that matters most, Gamecocks get themselves a pretty big win all the way around here. double R concerned about how the class might finish for Georgia. I think it's one thing to remember on this double R is while that undoubtedly, I'm not going to sort of spin this as something you can't see with your own eyes. Georgia wanted Burch. Georgia didn't get Burch. This was a big opportunity for UJ here today. But it is important to remember from the standpoint of how the 2020 class will be judged. For Georgia, a lot of the announcements yet to come are not going to be on Wednesday, this day here. They're going to be in early January. Some of this stuff is going to be held over until February. Maybe still room for a surprise here and there. Who even knows about that? So ultimately, the way in which the 2020 class for Georgia is going to be judged, that final proclamation is not going to be brought down here at the end of this Wednesday. It's going to stretch into early January and really to the traditional signing date in February as well. Georgia's still got some battles it's going to wage here, or some expected announcements that are going to kind of fall its way. But obviously for this moment in this spot, Georgia does not get the guy that it was looking to get. Beast Builds also says that LSU takes a bit of an L here. And I guess I kind of always felt that I thought the process leading up to this decision, to me, there was a way to read into this and say, oh, he's so quiet. Is this his way of not wanting to upset the people in Columbia that he planned on going somewhere else? But on the day of the action, just given the way that things go down, I thought that Georgia's, I guess, most threatening competitor might be South Carolina, because it's hard to tell a bunch of folks in a room in Columbia that you plan on going and playing for school, that the Gamecocks have to play each and every year, that your high school teammates may be led down by that. Recruiting is tough when you go into hostile territory. And Jordan Burch was a hostile situation that Georgia chose to go into, give its best shot. And I guess we'll find out to the extent that silver medals even matter here. Did Georgia finish second in this? Was someone else ahead of Georgia? Was this a last-minute decision? Jeff Sintel obviously joins us here. Dogs don't get the guy they were hoping to get. What's your immediate reaction to what you just saw?
Well, I think this is my reporter-writer brain working here, but I thought that Jordan Burch, for this entire cycle, if you ask anybody who does this for a living and pours their life and their merits and their wares and their experience into this, they would call Jordan Burch a mystery wrapped up in an enigma, containing a chewy super secret at the heart of this. So I thought it was very literal when Jordan Burch decided to present his decision to the world, that he had what looked to be a series of Christmas gift wrap boxes in front of him, and he was going to pick the one out that he thought was his one, and he found the black and garnet cap of South Carolina to fit him best. And I thought that was very fitting, and we can call it apropos, but for a guy that was wrapped up in so much drama and intrigue, for him to pull a hat out of a present just kind of felt like this is the holiday season and the way he was going to do it, because this one was such a shrouded and such a very closely guarded and protected secret. So the things people are going to start wondering about. So that local connection, very strong. He took more visits to the University of Georgia. Let's count them. Junior Day, G-Day, May scavenger hunt. There was also the July cookout. There was also an unofficial visit for the South Carolina game where he saw the Gamecocks beat Georgia. And then at the end, he gave Georgia the final last official visit. Don't think he ever took an official visit to South Carolina to check out that program. So now you start putting all this together and you go, well, his head coach is a former Gamecock quarterback. His fellow defensive line teammate at the Hammond School for the Skyhawks is also a 4-star defensive tackle. He also chose South Carolina. And then he's in the heart of South Carolina. He's in the same city, Columbia, South Carolina, where the Gamecocks are at. Now for 2 straight years, you see Georgia kind of go toe-to-toe and try to pull a 5-star out of the state of South Carolina. They tried to do that last year with Zach Pickens, and now they're trying to do that this year with Jordan Burch. And both times, Georgia goes 0 for 2 on that. Even with maybe the Will Muschamp era, needing to hunker down on its own and try to find some last legs in order to keep that program and keep continuing to coach for the Gamecocks. I just really think that this is something that South Carolina has been able to do, is kind of protect its backyard, especially to win a lot of defensive lineman battles. Because I just brought up the contention of what happened with Burch and what happened with Zach Pickens, but you also got to remember, the North Carolina defensive tackle, Rick Standage. That's the one that also chose South Carolina in another head-to-head battle with the Bulldogs. So that defensive line, folks, remember how Kinlaw was getting in and pressuring Jake Fromm a lot in that game this year in Athens? Well, South Carolina's defensive line is looking pretty sporty with 2 5-stars, and then one other high 4-star in the class of 2019.
Double R brings up something I've admittedly thought about. He says you can't really follow the visits anymore. I mean, listen, if you can't follow the visits anymore, what can you believe when it comes to recruiting, Jeff?
Well, maybe he just followed the visits to his hometown because, I mean, he
Unfortunately, that's a good point. Every time he wasn't in Athens, he happened to be in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, when he wasn't visiting Athens on a trip, or LSU got one visit, Alabama got one visit. Every other time he was in Columbia.
So obviously there's a need on a lot of Georgia fans' part to want to say, okay, so what's still left to be done here? Georgia got a big win today. Arian Smith, speedy wide receiver that it really needed. We're a little bit less than an hour away from Jermaine Burton making his announcement. Georgia's obviously hoping to get this young man away from LSU, be the second receiver LSU will have lost on this particular day after Raheem Jarrett surprisingly chose Maryland a little earlier. Keely Ringo had a pretty fun and cryptic tweet earlier today saying it's great to be a ... with the signature emoji. He's obviously signed somewhere, he's let us know. We'll have to find out about that. So for a lot of Georgia fans who say, well, how does the 2020 class finish up now that Jordan Burch has made this decision? As I said a moment ago, Jeff, a lot of this stretches beyond today and really stretches beyond the early signing period. But a quick thumbnail of what we're still yet to hear today and what we're going to hear over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I think today, maybe the next thing coming up is, this is what we said earlier in one of our shows, Brandon. I think any combination of Burton and Burch would be we'd call that a great day for Georgia recruiting for 2020 on the first day of the early period. Sure, there's a lot of work left to do in terms of, Broderick Jones' commitment, Cedric Von Prahn's commitment, Darnell Washington. The signing was made today. Keely Ringo put pen to paper, but no one's going to know what he chose until January the 4th at the All-American Bowl. My opinion here, Brandon, is if Georgia is able to change its wide receiver room by adding 2 more wide receivers of the quality, of the impact potential that Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens were a year ago, if they can do that with Arian Smith already in the fold and then add Jermaine Burton, mind you, we're seeing a lot of late flurry of crystal balls going online right now from 24/7 Sports. Those crystal balls are pointing to Burton to be a Bulldog as well. And in my book, if Georgia can add Burton plus Smith, that is a win for them getting 2 of their top most essential targets in my mind for the class of 2020.
And then to go back to defensive line here for a moment, how big of a need did you view the Burch signing, just given the fact that Warren Brinson has reaffirmed his pledge to UGA by signing today? Jalen Carter, who we spoke about on an earlier broadcast today, he's joined the fold there as well. Georgia has a lot of young 2019 signees, some of which we saw play a lot in Trayvon Walker, others of which we didn't see quite as much. What would you say about the Georgia defensive line depth at the moment now that we know that Burch won't be a part of it?
Well, first of all, Burch was more of an edge defender. You saw he had like 20 touchdowns this year for the Hammond High Skyhawks, playing all over as a receiver, a running back, working on the defensive line, even worked as a defensive back in some matchups, that 5-star matchup earlier this year with Julian Fleming. But you saw Georgia needing to reinforce its defensive line. Folks, count along with me. David Marshall, Mikhail Carter, Tyler Clark. Those guys all exhausted their eligibility on the front for Georgia. Julian Rochester is coming back. What Georgia needed to do was replenish, Justin Young, Michael Barnett. That's 5 names I just ripped off. Georgia needed to replenish what it had in the defensive line room, and it's done that with Warren Brinson, 4-star, Nazir Stackhouse, 4-star, and now Jalen Carter, 4-star as well. So they've got some guys coming to help with that defensive line room. And remember, Zion Logue, Bill Norton, and then Tommy Mitchell were 3 guys that they signed in the 2019 class to also help things across the defensive front.
Alexander Ratliff has an interesting comment on YouTube. I want to make sure I read it. He says, hey, BA, why are we struggling to get high-profile defensive linemen? Jordan Burch should have been a lock. With so many players leaving the defensive line, why can we not finish? So, Alexander, I may not give you the fully satisfying answer that you want, but I actually thought that one of the real bright spots for Georgia this season was its defensive line play. Not just the emergence of a guy like Trayvon Walker as a freshman, but the continued development of a guy like Jordan Davis, who at this point in time is one of the best players in the SEC regardless of position. He's become this space-eating nose man that the best teams in college football all covet. Georgia's got one of those in Davis. I would also add the way in which Tyler Clark kind of fulfilled the promise that he originally showed at Georgia in 2017. That speaks to the kind of player development that's going on there. So I think that Georgia misses out on Burch, but I don't know that the Burch miss is a part of a larger narrative here, because I think running against the grain of Georgia not getting Burch is the fact that a lot of the linemen that Georgia has gotten have actually played pretty well this season. Georgia was much better against the run, for instance, than it had been in 2018. And, the future for a lot of these guys potentially looks pretty bright. I'm not trying to put lipstick on a pig and tell you that Georgia wouldn't have liked to have gotten Jordan Burch. They obviously would have, but I don't know that Burch fits in any kind of negative narrative with the defensive line overall, because I think the results for that group are pretty good. There's some young guys I think Georgia fans ought to be excited about seeing a little more of.
I think it's going to be very interesting. I think everybody looks at the one that got away, the high-profile 5-star, but if you look at me, if the way I look at this thing is Georgia did very well by themselves by signing Jalen Carter. Carter, to me, looks like a guy that can make an impact right away at Georgia, much in the same vein that Trayvon Walker did for Georgia during this 2019 season as a true freshman. Even though that's a position across the defensive front in those trenches, which takes a grown man to be able to play in the SEC, I think Jalen Carter can do that. And I'd be very curious. I would be even tempted to say that those numbers for Jalen Carter during his first year in the SEC are going to look every bit as good as the numbers that Jordan Burch is going to put up for South Carolina and Columbia.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. A final thought from you here on this. Obviously, we'll have more video coverage today, including what we anticipate could be a very fun announcement from 4-star wide receiver Jermaine Burton coming up in just a bit. But a final thought here on either Burch or anything else we've seen this day up to this point.
So here's the thing I'm looking at. The Burton news will be very big at 3:30. We just mentioned a second ago that some of the crystal balls are popping Georgia's way late in this one. That's even though LSU lost a 5-star receiver to Maryland out of its 2020 class earlier today. Look for Georgia to maybe see how we can fill up the remaining spots in this class. Remember, Jared Zirkle, even though he was announced today, he did not sign as a member of the 2020 class. He's going to be a part of the 2021 class. Then you start thinking about how many Georgia commitments are out there right now. There's 17, Brandon, Georgia commitments out there right now. You've got 2 guys in Cedric Von Prawn and also Broderick Jones who have yet to make their college decisions. They're going to sign during the traditional signing period in February. That takes the number down to 15. You got to start thinking about where the scholarships could possibly go left in this class. Georgia would obviously want to park one for a Burton. They would want to park one for a Darnell Washington. They would want to park one for a Keely Ringo. They would want to park one for a Dante Manning. So right away, those 4 guys right there, you look at it. You look out of that number. There's 4 guys right there that take up 19 potential slots in this class. What is Georgia going to do with the rest of those? Who's left on the table? Yeah, I think that'll be fascinating to watch.
All right, we'll watch it play out. Thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Signing Day Special. Of course, we appreciate our friends at Kroger for making all of that possible the entire day and really during the entirety of the recruiting season. We'll be back with more later on here on the Dog Nation video channels, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We appreciate Kroger for making it all possible. We'll look forward to talking to you again here coming up in just a couple of moments.